Hello everyone! Today is the International Diabetes Day. Why this day? Because it's the anniversary of Dr. Banting, who discovered the role of insulin and who injected insulin to patients in Canada almost a century ago. This is really important because insulin is a vital good for type 1 diabetic people. So I wanted to talk about drugs and medical supplies for type 1 diabetes. I will try to address the following topics. Insulin. When you look at insulin, it's a bit funny because for us, it's a vital good. If we have no insulin, we will die. But insulin has sometimes negative or adverse effects on us because it may put our blood sugar level or glucose level too low or too high, and we have to act accordingly. But on the other hand, if you inject insulin to a person who is not diabetic, well, it may be fatal. So it keeps us alive, but it can kill other people. It's a bit funny when you look at it. Then, because it's good to have insulin, but we need to put it into our body because it is missing, I wanted to talk about insulin supplies. And once that is done, I would like to address my favorite topic, which is glucose meters. I have seen how much has changed since '94 as a patient, but when I look also at how it was before the 70s, before the first glucose meter, and before we have what we have today, a lot has changed. It is based on data analysis, but I believe also connectivity plays a role. And then I wanted to give a short view on what's next. I'm sure I do not have the full picture, but there is a lot going on, so I would like to address what I know. Insulin. Before the discovery of insulin and the first injection of insulin to type 1 diabetic patients, basically, I understand the condition could be diagnosed, but there was no treatment. So patients were put on a diet, they were starving, and they were dying. At the end of 1920, if I understand it well, Dr. Banting in Canada discovered or looked at an article that made a relationship between diabetes and pancreas. So he started working on that. And I think it's in 1921 that he discovered, he isolated insulin in a dog pancreas. And in 1922, he started injecting dog insulin to kids in the hospital. You have to know that it was dog insulin, which means that it was extracted from a dog pancreas. So you have to purify it, but you bring into a human body something that comes from an animal, so there may be adverse effects, and there were, like allergies. After that, there has been insulin delivered to patients from pigs and cows. So you needed pigs and cows' pancreas to produce, extract insulin, purify it, and injected to patients. In the 70s, I think they started working on what we call human or synthetic insulin, which does not longer rely on animals. And in 1982, there was the first biosynthetic insulin commercialized. But that is not the end, because you have to know that a type 1 diabetic patient will have two types of insulin at least. The basal or background insulin that should cover 24 hours and that works in the background. And the day insulin, which will cover what you eat, in fact, and that you may do more than once a day. As a patient, when I see what I had as insulin as a kid, as a teenager, and today, there has been a lot of differences because when I started handling my diabetes on my own, I had a night insulin that was not covering really 24 hours and that were not catching up the fact that my glucose level was getting high before lunch and dinner, which means that also the day insulin was not covering enough time, but it was not supported by the night insulin. And also I had the choice for the day insulin between two insulin, one that was very fast. The problem is that it was not lasting enough until the next lunch or dinner. And the second one is that I was very sensitive to it and it was landing me low very often. The other one my doctor decided to give me instead was medium insulin that was lasting 5 hours, but often what happened is that after I eat, I had a peak of sugar and it was not covered. So I was very high at dinner. Or if I had to cover the peak, I had to do a huge insulin dose, which is like 2 or 3 times what I do today. And I was landing dinner or lunch almost too low. So 3 years ago, we started changing my insulin, and I have now a day insulin that lasts enough to between each meal, that covers the peak after I eat, and this really makes a huge difference. And that even if I do a bit too much, I'm not super low. I'm no longer risking to collapse. And it works in combination with a background insulin that really makes that the hour before my day insulin stops acting and the time I will do my next injection, there is not a huge increase of sugar. So it has really changed a lot. I don't know what made that the properties of insulin have been adapted so, but I really find it amazing to see how much has evolved and improved. When we speak about insulin, we have to speak about insulin supplies, because insulin is external to our body and we need to inject it to our body. So if you imagine in the 20s and until a very long time, you had what I would call syringes, metallic, big, huge, not very thin, but quite thick. I will show you examples of old syringe I found. So imagine that you have to inject insulin in your body more than once a day with that stuff. This is an example of old syringes, and you have to purify them. I think you can reuse them, but imagine using that in your body more than once a day. This is an example of an insulin syringe, a specific one, in the 70s. So you can see that the needle is quite thin though, but it's quite big. This is what I used as a kid. So you have this 50 units and 100 units. Those syringes are really good for mixing insulin, background and day insulin, because when you are a kid, you mix a bit of both in the morning and in the evening, and you have just 2 injections a day. But you have to imagine that if I had to do my day insulin with that, I would have to bring more than 1 syringe. I would have to protect them because they are very thin, and I assume they are not very, if they can be damaged. And I did not see myself using that every day. I must admit, I'm scared of that. So I have a different system. I have an insulin pen. In fact, I have 2. This one is a plastic one. So you can see you have units here. Here you charge how much you want to do. There is a cartridge inside. You can trash it once it's empty. Here it's a metallic one. It's the same system, except that you just change the cartridge. You keep the pen. The problem is that if the pen is broken, it costs £120 at least. And then you put a needle on it to inject it. So that's the box, that's the pens. So the pen I find very convenient, and you just put them in a small specific box that comes along, at least for the metallic one. The plastic one, I can bring them in my bag without any problem, and then I have a specific purse for the needles that I bring with me. Then some people have insulin pump. If you look at insulin pump, you can see on the left side one of the first insulin pump, on the right side one of today's insulin pump. How it works, I understand here you had the device in the 70s with the insulin. You have to press something and you get tubes to inject the insulin into your body. It's the same system here, but the device is much smaller. You have the insulin cartridge, you have the tube, you have what they call the infusion site. You have to imagine that inside you have a needle, or they call it a cannula, but for me it looks like a needle. You press something here and the insulin goes from here to there into your body. You can disconnect the tube and the device, but not for too long. The risk is that it gets blocked. This is why I never had an insulin pump, because sometimes the insulin gets blocked in between the device and your body, so it's dangerous. I think this one is probably the most modern insulin pump you can see because you have no tube. So basically you press here, insulin is injected there through the pod. Not sure where the insulin is. I think it's probably here because you have no connection between here and there. I assume, but I'm not sure, that there is probably a chip and a connection to make it work. That is the most developed system today in terms of insulin pumps. Now, glucose meters. If we talk about glucose meters, you have to know that I understand until the 70s, there was no real way to check your glucose level other than through urine checks, so urine tests. It's not very developed, it's not very modern. Then in the 70s, there was the first glucose meter developed. I will show you a picture. I will show you some pictures of how much size has decreased. And then I will show you the most modern thing that can exist. For mine is not the most modern. So I understand this is one of the first glucose meters. So it looks like a radio. You have some strips here. Basically, you have to put that into the device. You have to put blood on the strip, and then you get a result. I assume you have to activate it somehow. Those are devices from the 90s to the 21st century, so you can see they are much less thick than this one, and the size has considerably decreased from there to there. I have something that is even much smaller, but that is at least more than 10 years old, so it's quite old. This is what I had when I was a teenager. It's still working, but not very well. You can see that it's like a USB stick. Apparently it's also Bluetooth connected, but I don't know what's the point because I never used Bluetooth with it, and my doctor was also always plugging it into a laptop to get the result. The problem with that is that it needs a USB port to be charged, so not a lot of laptops have it anymore. How it works, you have strips there, so you take one. I'll try. So you put one here in the device, inside, and then you have this lancing device, which is twice the size of what I had twice smaller than what I had when I was a kid. You have something that some people are scared of, and I will not try to do it here because I know some people don't like blood. So yeah, you have this small thing with a needle on it. So you put it into, you charge the device, then you close with the button, and then you will have to prick your finger and the result will appear on the device. You can see this one is quite thick though. It's not very thin, but I think it's one of the smallest that exist. And today there is something even more developed. It's what we call flash or continuous glucose meters. You have to imagine it works with a sensor on your skin with a cannula or needle. There is a chip on the sensor, and then you have a reading device like this, and you scan. So I will try to show the sensor. This is the sensor system. So basically you have a sensor, you have a needle inside, you have a chip here, and then you have devices to scan the sensor. You can use your phone. But usually you have to activate it with the reader, which is this thing. So this, if you want to activate a sensor, you need to first go with the reader. So this reader is probably much thicker than my phone, but it has less functionality than the phone, because when I look at the app on the phone, so this is how it looks like. You scan it, so you have a on-time result. You also have the trend, which really changed. So you can see that it gives an arrow and it can tell you, okay, you are good, but you are going down, which make me think, should I take something to eat or should I let it go like this? For example, you have also analysis. You have that is the trend. You have really a calculation of how much % of your checks are in the target, above the target, really high, really low, a bit below the target. you have like the trends per hours, and you have your estimated, if it goes, average glucose level. This has changed a lot because with that, I did not have so many data. I had just a number out of the blue without the context. Is it going down? Is it going up? And sometimes I was feeling bad, but it was good. The result was good. And I was like, this is not normal. And I was checking 1 hour later and it was not good. While here, I can really act before it gets crazy. And this has changed a lot. I wouldn't have so many good results if I hadn't that. This also helped me to change my insulin because we could see the daily pattern. So we could see where they were high and lows and what makes that the earlier insulin I used were not good. One much more developed system that the Abbott Flash is the Dexcom or Medtronic. You can see that is something. I have a similar stuff for the Abbott. You put the sensor into that, and then you put that on your skin, and you press, and you connect the sensor you bring the sensor to your skin. So that's the sensor for Dexcom. It lasts less long than Abbott. Abbott is for 14 days. This one is for 6 days. You have the app, as I have on my device, and then you can connect the app to a phone. I can connect the app to a phone, to a watch. I can connect the app to my phone, but I can also connect it to a watch. The difference between this system and the Abbott system is that this system has alarms, so you don't even need to check. It will alert you when your sugar is dropping or increasing quickly, while here I still have to check. My Abbott is connected with NFC. Those are connected with Bluetooth. I think the next Abbott will last for 14 days still and has the alarm system on Bluetooth. And the latest version of Abbott, the Freestyle 3, is expected to be much smaller and to be even much more developed in terms of functionalities. Then you have a totally different system, which is Eversense. Eversense is different because you have a sensor. Basically, you have an implant in your skin. They implant something in your body. You put the transmitter or transmitter here, and then you have the same system with the phone, the app, and the reader. You scan. It sends alerts. The difference is that the implant is in your skin for 90 days, so you do not need to change it every 2 weeks or every week. I think it's the one that lasts for the longer time, but it's the one that is the most complicated to get. I think it's probably the most expensive, but you need to go to a hospital to get the implant in your skin. What is next? There are 2 things I wanted to talk about. The Insulino pen, which is basically like my insulin pens. The difference is that you can connect it to an app and it will tell you how much you have done of which insulin. This seems a bit crazy if you are an external person, but sometimes in the night, when you have to do your background insulin, you may not remember if you have done it, and if you do it twice, it can have disastrous consequences. Or you may do by mistake the wrong one, the fast one instead of the night one. So I would love to have an Insulino pen device, because I understand that I would have track of what I have done, and this would avoid me some mistakes I did in the past, especially when you are tired. And then something that is really interesting is the artificial pancreas system, where basically your continuous glucose monitor, you have a continuous glucose monitor and you have an insulin pump, and they interconnect to each other, and basically the system makes decision on its own. So you get insulin injected to your body, but you don't really need to do anything except, I think, bring in parameters like what are you eating and which activity you are doing. There are some that have been developed in open source by patients themselves. They are not yet approved by the FDA, so I wouldn't use such a system. There are others that are developed by companies, and this is really something I'm looking forward. Because today I don't want an insulin pump, but if I can get it connected to a CGM, then I'm sure my life will change.